Oh, sorry. I'm so sorry. This is the problem with the round robin.
I've been kicked out of worse places than this.
Please, we'd love to hear your answer.
Thank you. Thank you. We have the most robust mental health platform of the group. It's called Mental Health Matters. It's on our website. I would commend you to it. Two things of note. One calls for 10 regional mental health centers throughout the state of Maryland, obviously here in Montgomery County, because if I get elected, we'll be the first governor from Montgomery County. We'll actually not view Montgomery County as solely the ATM machine for the state, but as someplace that ought to get some of the resources. Second issue is it calls for one licensed mental health professional in every school for every 250 children. Because what we're seeing is so much of the trouble comes from these mental health issues, and that is critical. When I was Attorney General, we started an internet safety program. We went around to schools and talked to parents and students about how to be safe on the internet, and we need to continue to do that going forward. Another issue actually that contributes to the mental health of students is broadband, and we saw that during COVID. The lack of broadband, both in inner cities and in rural areas, of students that were very frustrated by not having broadband. I was the first candidate to call for universal pre-K and also universal child care because it's very frustrating for children to show up in kindergarten and already be behind in the equity gap in education. So we need to make sure we implement the blueprint. In order to implement the blueprint, we need to have a Democrat actually elected as governor. And then the last thing I'll mention is mentoring. It was actually, I was glad that that was brought up. I've mentored my whole life. When I was an assistant U.S. attorney, I mentored a young boy named Matthew Shepard at Amadon Elementary School, kept in touch with him. I also served on the board of college, recently since leaving office, served on the board of College Track, which takes students and puts them in Super Maryland and gets them into college as part of Kevin Durant's program. I started my own nonprofit called Trump City Youth Lacrosse in Baltimore 12 years ago. We had 400 or 500 kids a year there in that program. So you really need to work with students and care about the mental health.
Thank you. I know if I mess up on order, I'll be caught, so I appreciate it. For the next question, we're going to start with Westmore. And the question, I'm going to have a timer go off when you have 30 seconds left, and then I'm just going to cut you off at your time. I think that hopefully will be helpful. So the question is this. Do you support an end of life or medical aid in dying option? Why or why not? And would you seek any specific restrictions in a state level law?
Yes, I mean, this is a, and I understand this is a very a challenging and difficult thing where, this is something that actually within the past few years, I've had to see and understand and have seen how this process and this decision is a very personal, very difficult one. I also know that when you're watching those you love in extraordinary difficulty, extraordinary pain, to watch them go through that, it is challenging. And so I would support, as it comes to my desk, a policy that would support if a person, and again with the restrictions that a person can then actually go out and make the decisions, individual decisions on their own. That if elected governor, I would sign the End of Life Act if it came to my desk. This is something that I know that we're going to have to work in concert with not just legislators but also activists on it, because this is a very personal decision. But I also do understand that when we have elements of pain and challenge that people are facing, it is something that I would not only sign, but I would advocate for as it's making its way through the legislature as well.
Thank you. One moment. Next, we'll hear from County Executive Baker.
Make sure you hold the mic up to your mouth. Okay. I'm going to give a really short answer to this because it's not, an academic question. It's actually what I had to deal with. As many of you know, I said at the beginning of my life, diagnosed with Alzheimer's in 2010 when I became county executive, and progressively, declined. And so, as a family, there were many times, especially in 2017 and in 2018, where this came up. She was on a respirator, a feeding tube. And so my answer to it is yes, I would sign it. It is hard for family members. It was hard for us. It was hard for my girls. It's hard for me. But you do it in consultation with the doctors, your family, your religious leaders. But yes, I think families should have that option. We were fortunate that we were able to bring her home and that she passed away in her bed. We didn't have to make that decision. But as a family, we decided we were gonna let mommy go. So it's something I think every family, it's a hard one. I know people have come out on different sides of it, but until you've gone through it, till you see your kids go through it, it's something that we definitely, that as governor, I would sign and would support. Thank you.
Mr. King, please, thank you.
Thanks. I agree with what's been said. I would absolutely support that end of life option. You know, I watched after I got kicked out of high school, I went to live with my aunt and uncle. My uncle had been a Tuskegee Airman, and my aunt had been his partner throughout a career in the military. And they ran a tight ship in their house, as you might imagine, which was an adjustment. But they made a huge difference in my life. She later got pancreatic cancer, and we all watched her suffer through that. And so I think it's important that people who are suffering immense pain have the choice to work with their doctor and their faith leaders to make a choice about end of life. But I also want to tie that to another issue that hasn't come up so far tonight, which is our real crisis of care as a state. That there are many folks who don't have the option to stay at home when they need care, because we have a huge waiting list as a state for in-home care providers, because we don't compensate in-home care providers well enough. And we aren't making an effort to make sure that people have that ability to be at home with adequate care. And so that one of our priorities in a King Syria administration will be an investment in addressing that crisis of care, both for our seniors and also for early childhood. We have a real crisis of inadequate access to early childhood care. And we have many families that are struggling with both. I have many peers who are struggling to try to support a parent who doesn't have adequate in-home care and their child for whom they cannot find adequate quality child care. As a society, we need to step up and make sure we address that crisis of care.
Thank you. Comptroller Pancho, please.
Yeah, I think the devil's in the details, because, you know, I said the other night to my wife, if I'm ever incapacitated, because, look, more than 1 million people have died of COVID, many of them on ventilators. She said, well, what would you like? I said, oh, well, definitely just cut the thing off. I don't want to be a burden. Then I stopped for a minute. I said, well, yeah, but if it looks like I might have a little chance, could you maybe be a little flexible? And so I think the devil's in the details. We need to really have advanced directives. They need to be carefully thought out. They need to be, you know, this cannot be something done casually. And I would just like to take my 1 minute remaining and say, I'm going to be a governor that actually coaches people to live long, productive, pain-free lives. We're going to reduce hypertension. We're going to reduce diabetes. We're going to reduce heart disease by significant amounts by urging people as they live and are okay and alive to take care of their own personal health. I get up every morning and look at my wife and say, are you pain-free? She says, yes. Are you pain-free? I say, yes, I am. And then we both get up and walk. And we have a mantra that we get, which is walk more, eat less as you get older. And we're going to coach people. And we're going to provide a whole series of community clinics and federally qualified healthcare clinics that provide access and affordability so that people can be healthy. At the end of life, yes, generally I support a detailed directive that actually describes the situation that occurs. And I applaud all of my colleagues also in their responses. But let's concentrate on what happens before we get to the end of life. Because thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Gensler?
Thank you. Yes, I fully support death with dignity. As has been mentioned, a lot of this is informed by your own lives. And I remember when my grandfather was 100 and a half, and he had all the ladies he could at the Hebrew home down in Rockville. He was fine. He was reading his book at night, and I was the state's attorney at the time. I went over and I held his hand and he expired. And that's one way. But both of my parents have passed within the last 5 years. I mentioned my mom and dad that was here before. They both had a very long runway. And both of them said, don't bring twos of me. Nothing's going to get better from here. And so that's what we did. And it was the right thing to do. And they would have suffered, and no one wants to see suffering. So there are things that are personal decisions. And I'll sort of use a little bit of my time to talk about two of them. One is for gay people to be able to marry people that they love. The government shouldn't tell them whether they can or not. So I led the statewide effort for marriage equality here in Maryland. We had 6 states that had it. I wrote a paper recognizing out-of-state same-sex marriage. The far-right Republicans literally started impeachment proceedings against me, and we won that. And then it's interesting, there's always statewide elected official in America, non-federal, to run unopposed, and we got almost 1.4 million votes. They really didn't care that much. But we have another thing that's on the ballot this year, which is women's reproductive rights. When this Supreme Court overturns Roe v. Wade or scales it back, we have to have a Democratic governor that can make sure that we protect, as like a brick wall, women's reproductive rights. And let the woman choose what she wants to do. Not a bunch of guys on the Supreme Court that have political agendas. Let the woman choose what she wants to do. So we need to make sure we win this election, and these are personal choices.
Thank you, Mr. Perez.
I want to start out. Rashawn has been a good friend of mine for a long time, and we talk a lot, even now. The dignity with which he and his wife dealt with an unspeakably painful situation was remarkable. Rashawn, I didn't walk in your shoes, so I can't say I feel your pain, but you have a lot of friends, and I'm proud to be one of them. We all have stories. My mother was the caregiver in the house, and then she needed care, and she would have hated the situation she found herself in the end of her life. And that's why this question for me is a clear question, and it is a question of choice, and that's why I would sign this law. And the other, when John talked about building that provider network, I was thinking about the same thing, John, as well. And then as your labor secretary, one of the things I'm most proud of as your U.S. labor secretary was we enacted a regulation to allow home healthcare workers, 2 million strong, mostly women of color on food stamps, to get access to minimum wage and overtime protections. They didn't have that. When I got to the labor department, you could work 80 hours a week and make like $400 because they were considered like babysitters. Casual labor, to anything but casual. It is serious work. And I was proud to change that rule to help folks. And Doug is also correct. Choice is the connective tissue. And when I was at the Justice Department, we implemented in 1994 the Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances Bill, which was designed to address the fact that so many clinics were being bombed, harassed, doctors were being killed. The next governor will make sure, and if it's me, I will make sure that we have a constitutional amendment, that we protect clinics, that we protect a woman's right to choose. My 2 daughters have less rights in about a week from now than my wife and I will have had. That is unconscionable. We need to change that.
For our next question, we are going to start with County Executive Baker. Will you support a woman's right to abortion and veto any attempts to the contrary? And, avoid policy specifics and go on other tangents at your own peril. Will you support a woman's right to abortion and veto any attempts to the contrary? And should Maryland's current reproductive laws be modified in any way?
Thank you, Tom Perez, for answering my question. Yes, I would. I think we, first of all, the quick answer is yes. I think we should put it in the Constitution. I think what the legislature has done is the right thing. For the governor to veto it is the wrong thing. But then let's have a real conversation about what this is about. When we talk about a woman's right to choose, we're not talking about every woman, all women. We're mostly talking about women of color and women who are poor, because the rest of us actually have choices. And so in addition to doing what we do here in Maryland to protect a woman's right to choose, we should also be on the vanguard. We should be the voice that's on that Sunday morning show talking about this, leading this effort. As governor, that's what I would do. Because this is just not about, this is also about what we see with reproductive rights, but it's also about healthcare, access to quality healthcare. And so I would lead that effort as governor to make sure that we're on the front lines and leading this. Thank you.
Thank you. Secretary King on reproductive rights.
My running mate, Michelle Seary, runs the Women's Law Center of Maryland, which is one of the leading advocacy organizations in the state on issues of gender equity. She also was the board president at Planned Parenthood. And so for us, the question is, how do we ensure that Maryland not only protects abortion access, but really is a North Star for the country on the protection of abortion rights? That means, yes, we absolutely need a constitutional amendment to protect abortion rights. We also need to invest in training of providers. Governor Hogan is holding back funds that the General Assembly committed to the training of providers. Who the governor is matters. He claims, Governor Hogan claimed when he ran, this was a matter of settled law, but now today, he's holding back the very funding that would provide training for providers, which are desperately needed. In 2/3 of Maryland counties, you can't access abortion care. We need those trainers that training for Marylanders, but we also need it for folks who are going to come from other states to access abortion here in Maryland. We need to make sure we provide protections for those who come here from other states, abortion refugees. We have to make sure that we provide protections for those who come to access abortion care and protections for the providers against any legal action that might be taken in another state. Both Connecticut and California are pursuing laws that I think we should try to replicate in Maryland to ensure that folks from West Virginia or as far away as Texas who need to get abortion care can come to Maryland to do that. It also matters who we appoint as judges and what approach they take. And I have to say, I appreciate Doug making the point that he's a supporter of reproductive rights, but he also was a supporter of Brett Kavanaugh's confirmation to the Supreme Court. So who we appoint as judges matters. And we have to scrutinize carefully what people say. Kelly Schultz, the likely Republican nominee, is saying she will protect abortion rights, but I don't believe her.
Thank you. Councilor Franco on reproductive rights.
Thank you very much. And many of you may not realize that 58% of all abortions in the country are done medicinally with a pill. A pill. That's all that the procedure that when we were young, or when everyone here was younger, is not the same. But the states that are moving to criminalize eating the pill. And John was talking about the governor's decision, and I agree completely with him and wrote him a long letter saying that we really need to release the $3.5 million because the legislature only put it in for the following fiscal year. But now with all of the brouhaha and the states that are moving, 26 of them, I think, to criminalize eating the pill. We need to get ready for a tsunami of people coming to our state who need this medical care. And that's what the $3.5 billion was going to be used for, to recruit a new group of physician assistants and others who would be authorized to give the prescription for the pill. And it's effective up until 12 weeks. So I think the ground is shifted, but the problem is that half the country is trying to criminalize this procedure, anything associated with it. And Maryland obviously has to continue to be a beacon of reproductive freedom for women. And we need to do it forcefully. So all of the various provisions that have been talked about tonight, I'm in support of. But remember, this is a political battle, not a medical issue. And thank you very much for, several years ago, I was chair of the board of trustees of the pension system, which I am now. When I was vice chairman, I moved to take all of our money out of Alabama and Mississippi companies because they had these very negative pro-life laws, and we're seeking to criminalize abortion. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I've been in a book club for 33 years that I actually started, and with all these smart people I knew, so they couldn't kick me out because it was my book club. And I read every night before I go to sleep, and I read fiction. So I appreciate Mr. King's fictitious idea that I supported Brett Kavanaugh. I think I'm just going to leave it there and say that's ridiculous. However, I'll use the point to make a bigger point, which again is why we need a Democrat to win. Right now, I clerked on the Maryland Court of Appeals. Right now, the Maryland Court of Appeals, which is our highest court, it should be called the Supreme Court, has 6 of the 7 judges who were appointed by Governor Hogan. So while we can all be in favor of abortion and women's reproductive rights, and I'm unabashedly so, without restriction, we need to make sure that we have a governor that doesn't chip away. And the thing, and it was mentioned the $3.5 billion. For those of you who don't know what that is, the governor, this governor, Republican governor, withheld funds so that we couldn't have enough access for people from out of states to come here to get abortion. So that's the little things like that do matter. But we also have to understand that relevant experience matters. And so when I was state's attorney, I had a very interesting case, and we'll use this because this is a little creative. Yesterday, I was in Salisbury, and I went to the fire station that said Safe Haven right here. And I got that law passed because I prosecuted a woman named Tanisha Montague who was here illegally, had a baby, put the baby in a trash house in Gaithersburg, Maryland. She didn't want to tell anybody she was pregnant because she didn't want to get deported. But so she had the baby, but instead of having somewhere to go, she put it in a trash can. Luckily, the next morning, someone found it when they were taking out their trash. There was a faint cry, and she was prosecuted for attempted murder. I prosecuted myself because I wanted to use that. What you do about that is the hard part. And she, I don't think she got any jail time, but we then took that, went to Annapolis and had a safe haven law. So now today in Maryland, if you have a baby and you don't want that baby, you can give that baby up to a firehouse, a police station, or a hospital without any questions in the first week. So that's why relevant experience matters for who your next governor is.
Mr. Perez.
You know, one thing a governor is going to have to deal with is there are issues that are foreseeable that come up. And then there are issues that aren't foreseeable. I doubt 4 years ago, there was a debate about how to deal with the pandemic. I doubt 4 years ago that there was a question about a woman's right to choose. And here we are today. Life has changed a lot. Our democracy is on fire. It's a 5-alarm blaze. And I think it's really important to have a governor that has a wide breadth and depth of experience. I mentioned before that I helped to implement the original FACE Act, Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances Act. By the way, the reason that law got passed, we had a Democratic president, Democratic House, Democratic Senate. We get things done when we put Democrats in charge. Parenthetically, I digress. But folks, you know, when Dr. Tiller was murdered in Kansas, I remember I was leading the Civil Rights Division, and I went out to Wichita to meet with the community. They were scared to death. When Dr. Slepian was murdered 2 miles from where I grew up in Buffalo, New York, I remember the fear that people felt. And that's why this law is so important. Here's what I would do in addition to the constitutional amendment. We need to form a task force, federal, state, and local, for security. Because folks, we are a target. West Virginia will have copycat laws just like Texas. Folks will come here. The providers of care will be a target. And we need, and I would introduce a law that would direct the Attorney General's office to represent any provider who gets sued because these other states are allowing those lawsuits to happen. We need to do everything we can to fortify our infrastructure here. And we need to lead across the country. Justice Brandeis famously said, states are laboratories of democracy. He didn't have Texas and Florida in mind, but I want him to have Maryland on this and so many other issues in mind, where we will be the incubator of innovation and the protector.
Next, we're going to hear from Mr. Moore. You'll hear an alarm when you have 30 seconds remaining.
Thank you so much. And last fall, we actually brought this up as a campaign where we said that we would fully support a constitutional amendment and push for a constitutional amendment to be able to fortify this within Maryland law. And there were people who did push back at us and say, well, why are you talking about something that is not a challenge? The thing that we have learned over these past years is how fragile our democracy is and how fragile our freedoms are. And as everyone has stated, you know, we are now going to see firsthand the fact that we as a state have got to stand firmly and state clearly where we stand on these issues. And so I want to say that clearly the Moore-Miller administration will stand firmly in support of reproductive freedoms because abortion is healthcare, period. That we are going to ensure that in this moment, that we are both going to support the idea that our administration will fight our heart out to enshrine the right to an abortion in Maryland's Constitution and make access to reproductive care more affordable and accessible. But we're also not going to stop there, because to ensure professional care, it means immediately releasing the funding provided by the Maryland General Assembly in 2022 to expand access to reproductive health training. But it also means following up on what the legislature did to take important steps to improve diversity that we have in reproductive healthcare field, which Arun and I will implement to actually track our progress. It means ensuring that we're going to provide safety and also security for those providers, because they now find themselves in a very dangerous situation. And so being able to codify this in Maryland law and making sure that Maryland will always be a safe haven for women's health care and reproductive rights, that also ensures doing all the other things as well to ensure that we are fortifying that and we're protecting that for people in Maryland and anyone who sees Maryland as a safe haven to be able to receive abortion care.
Thank you. I'll up the volume on the alarm next time. We got through everybody on that one. Okay. This next one, I'll warn the candidates. It's a big block of text because there were multiple questions about this issue. What is your solution to the commuting mess on I-270 and the Beltway? Do you support toll lanes? If you are elected governor and the proposed widening comes to your desk for approval, will you take steps to cancel the project? I'll go first to Mr. King.
So I do not support the toll lane highway expansion. It to me is a mistake in the midst of the huge challenges we face around climate change to focus our transportation policy on highway expansion. It is a mistake to use a toll lane strategy that research has shown will actually make traffic worse. This is the wrong direction. What we should do instead is see a much more significant investment in public transportation, including rapid bus service. We should see a much more significant effort to make sure we finish public transportation projects that have been allowed to fall behind schedule, like the Purple Line. We need to make sure that we are considering ways to use reversible lanes and other strategies to try to address traffic before we take the drastic step of expanding the highway, the environmental damage that would come with that. Now, there is part of the project which I do support, which is the American Legion Bridge part of the project, but that we can use federal funds to support. We don't have to use a toll road strategy to do that. More broadly, our transportation challenge as a state is to be people-centered, not car-centered, to figure out how we move towards more transportation, more walkable communities, more opportunities for people to bike. We also need to move towards electric cars so that we can reduce the environmental impact of our automobiles. I've proposed building 10,000 charging stations so that we can move more quickly to electric cars. That will also allow us to reduce our dependence on despots with oil fields, who now control not just the economy of the United States, but the global economy. Moving more quickly to electric cars will allow us to address that.
Thank you very much. Is that good?
You're good to go.
Yeah, no, I'm a huge fan of mass transit, and we need an integrated system all over the state, not just in some parts of the state. We need it everywhere, Charles, West, Eastern Shore, et cetera. That is something that includes the Purple Line, which is behind time, and we had some problems there as far as the construction company that was in charge, so it is behind the date, it's over budget, but it's an essential mass transit line. And I support completely finishing that. The red line in Baltimore, which is an east-west mass transit line, needs to be done. And I think, and obviously all of us here are going to support that kind of mass transit investment. I was responsible for cutting the governor's $18 billion widening program for 495 all the way over to Prince George's County. I reduced it by 2/3 and went from 18 billion down to 6 billion. And part of that was the American Legion Bridge, which is crumpled, and we need to replace that. And we have a good plan to move forward on that replacement of the American Legion Bridge, and then up 270 to the intercounty connector. I think we have to do something about traffic congestion. Millions of our citizens drive cars. Many of them are low income. They have to drive miles and miles and miles to get to work. So I advocate gas tax holidays, which I think are a wonderful form of relief to those individuals. And I think we can walk and chew gum at the same time and be in favor of mass transit, integrated, rapid, all over the state, but also where we have pockets of traffic congestion. 270 and the American Legion Bridge, we need to take action. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Gensler, on the road widening plan.
Yeah, as many of you watched when I was Attorney General, the environment was my major issue, was my top priority, cleaning up the Chesapeake Bay, getting alternative sources of energy and fighting climate change. And we have the Green Maryland plan on our website, which I would commend you to. In terms of this particular project, much has been said, and actually the comptroller, I would think he voted correctly on that, which was to get the second and third phase where they were going to take the whole beltway and widen it and knock down people's homes and make more traffic on the beltways. Probably not our time for that. But the 270 American Legion Bridge project, the American Legion Bridge has to be fixed. It has to be fixed over an environmentally correct way with environmental studies, because nobody wants to play hot potato and be the person driving over the bridge when it collapses. On 270, we need to make sure that we actually have the infrastructure in place so we can have the electric charging stations, electric vehicle stations in place so that the cars that are on 270 are electric vehicles and that can contribute to the fossil fuel problem. That road is going to happen. The problem is the procurement in this administration. You can't overstate how bad it is, the way the procurement system works here. So it has to be done in a fair way. Then we have to have mass transit. And there's an enormous amount of infrastructure money right now. So we need to have a connection from Frederick to 270. Frederick to Sugar Grove on 270 so they can go on the natural. We have to have the red line in Baltimore. What the governor canceled now is they're taking a sledgehammer to the people of Baltimore. A third of the people in Baltimore don't have cars. How are they gonna get to work? The Purple Line, billions of dollars over budget, years late. Southern Maryland Light Rail, from Branch Avenue to Charles County needs to be done. So, and then the Wilson Bridge, we need to have the subway go over that like it was created for. So we need to reduce our dependence on fossil fuel. Actually, my private sector life, I represent the state of Vermont in suing fossil fuel companies over climate change. I started working with a lot of states to do this. So we need to become much more environmentally sensitive and wean ourselves off of fossil fuels and the automobiles.
The first question that I always ask when we talk about transportation is, what's your philosophy? We need balance, okay? We have gridlock, but you can't pave your way out of gridlock. When the environmental studies are done under the new federal laws, they're looking at two things, okay? They're looking at climate change and they're looking at equity. And if you don't have a plan for those two things, then you're not going to pass muster. So here's what I would do. And I think there's widespread agreement. We got to replace the American Legion Bridge, period, end of story. Okay, and when we do it, let's make sure we fit it with, so that it's ready for rail when the next generation comes forth and does that. Okay, then we can continue the HOV lane to the spur. We don't need to widen 270. We got all these Jersey barriers. We get rid of Jersey barriers. You can have lanes that go north in the afternoon, south in the morning, and you can do that. And I am not persuaded at the moment that we necessarily need a P3 to do that. Why? Because we got all these federal infrastructure dollars. You can borrow up to 50% of the cost at the Treasury rate. That's the rock bottom rate. And so as your governor, I would renegotiate. I would take a step back because these P3 projects, I'm not against P3s per se. I'm against lousy P3s. And the P3 on the Purple Line was a lousy P3. The P3 to build the Maryland house was a very good P3. But you know what? Before we do that, we've got to understand something. Our world has changed post-COVID. What are our commuting patterns? If we have permanent 15% reductions in traffic, that's a big deal. And so we should know that. And we should compare. If we do this ourselves without a P3, can we do it viably? And that's the question I would answer. So I would renegotiate because I don't want to make a decision that's going to affect for 30 years. And the thing I will insist on are project labor agreements, because I not only want to build roads and transit, I want to build the middle class. And that's how we use project labor agreements effectively.
Thank you. And now we're going to go to Mr. Moore. You'll hear an alarm with 30 seconds remaining.
Thank you so much. And first, I want to be clear that in the Moore-Miller administration, that we oppose the plan for the current plan under I-270 495 as it was proposed by the Hogan administration. And it is not, and when we think about it, because there really are three lenses in the way that I will look at every single transportation project that sits in front of me and sits on my desk. The first lens is equity. And equity, that means both in the construction and the access, who is building it and who can benefit from it. The second is going to be environmental impact. And that focuses on environmental justice and specifically what it means to low-income communities, the fact that we have to invest in mass transit options, because when you consider the fact that over 40% of greenhouse gas emissions is actually coming from vehicles, we have to do a better job of supporting mass transit options. And the third piece is strong community input, that the community must be involved. This is not going to be a conversation about what we're going to do to communities, but what we can get done with communities. And if you look at the current plan that we have, 270 as proposed for the Hogan administration, none of those things were factored in. So that's why we stand against it as proposed. And so, and I agree with some of my other colleagues, where this is not about being against P3s as a whole, but it is making sure the P3s actually are benefiting the community and benefiting our society. And when you look at, for example, what happened within Virginia, we've seen P3s happen in Virginia, but let's not forget that Virginia had to overhaul its entire original law after a failed P3 increased transparency, and they built in additional protections. When we also look what was factored in before, initially when this deal was done, there was a mass transit option that played into the reconstruction of 270. That's now gone. And that has to be factored in when we're talking about the future. And so when we're pulling these things together, it means that us being able to think with a future-faced focus of being able to incorporate equity, transparency, the environment, and also community input into how we're going to improve transit inside of the region.
Thank you. Mr. Baker.
I agree with what Tom Perez said about this issue. He's absolutely right, especially about looking at the contract that the governor has. This won't be anything novel. If you think about it, dealing with the purple line and the red line, an issue that has been around for as long as I've been involved in politics. That's 1994 when I was a delegate. Yet we had negotiated the purple line, County Executive Ike Leggett, myself, the mayor of Baltimore City, we negotiated the purple line and the red line. The Hogan administration comes in and said, we need to look at everything. We need to look at it again and decide whether we're going to go forward. And the only reason the purple line went forward was because they asked for additional revenues from Montgomery County and Prince George's County for a statewide project. They also said, when we raised the gasoline tax, that we wouldn't have to do a toll lane in 270, that we would actually have money in the Transportation Trust Fund. And then he came in and he cut the red line. So my thing is we need to look at everything that this administration has done. I'm not against P3s as a philosophy. I've done them before. I'm not against toll lanes. We did the ICC. But I'm against bad projects and widening roads when we don't have to, and not including the community. And so from my perspective, the first thing, having done this, is you have to involve the local jurisdiction. There's no way I would have a project coming through my county without being involved in it. That's why the purple line is the way it is. The governor shut us out. That can't happen. You have to involve the community. Montgomery County, same thing in the southern part of our state when we're dealing with Charles County and coming and having the metro come across the Woodrow Wilson Bridge. You have to involve it. One of the first things we have to do as a state is also reinstitute the red line to make sure we're having transportation and mass transit around. The final thing, and it was said, and Mr. Perez is right, COVID has changed everything. We have to look at the pattern of how people are coming into offices and take that into consideration when we do our transportation. Thank you.
Thank you. For our next question, we're going to start with Comptroller Francho. Oh, a P3 is a public-private partnership. I encourage them to go wonky, so I'll take the blame for that. Our next question is going to go first to Comptroller Francho. Over the last few years, we've seen shifting and broadening and deeper conversations about some important terms in our society, like justice and sustainability. How would you define sustainability, and how would you position Maryland to be a leader in that area?
Sustainability on the environment.
It's from the crowd. The question is, how would you define sustainability?
Well, sustainability is something that can be repeated over and over again, for example, and has continuity to it. For example, on the crime issue, you have to have sustainable action on that. It can't be just a little bit here and a little bit there. So I'm a big advocate of, I have zero tolerance, obviously, for any kind of police misconduct, but I have zero tolerance for any kind of crime, be it hate crime or verbal crime or physical crime or violent crime. But I think we need a sustained effort to make sure that hotspots around the state that are experiencing crime upticks, we need to put our elite law enforcement, state police and federal marshals in, and not just a 1 month thing and then they leave, but in a sustained basis. Let me just speak about the sustainability of the environmental issues. Day one as governor, I'm going to advocate that the state immediately commit itself to being not an importer of electricity from the grid that's generated by fossil fuel, but an exporter of electricity to our regional grid that's generated in Maryland from solar and wind power. I'm going to suggest that the state do a complete conversion of its vehicle fleet to electric vehicles. And I'm going to suggest that we be the first net zero carbon emission state in the country. I'm not picking a date because that's a heavy item to be advocating. But we need to get in line to make sure that the carbon technologies that are going to be developed can be implemented immediately in Maryland so we can be the #1 state in the country to be carbon neutral. Thank you.
Next to discuss the concept of sustainability is Mr. Gensler.
Does just sustainability or justice and sustainability? I think you asked both.
I said that there's shifting definitions of important terms in our society. The question is, how do you define sustainability, and how would you apply that to your administration?
Okay, I misheard. So in terms of sustainability, I think the comptroller is correct. It's about environmental issues, and so as an environmental attorney general, we had 22 river audits, and we went to around the state and conducted those audits with the people that are on those rivers, with the river keepers and the different environmental clubs, and determined who we should go after and who we should support and what programs we should support. So I ended up prosecuting out-of-state polluters, including PPG, which is a West Virginia power plant that was putting acid rain all over Western Maryland, including Chesapeake Energy, which was a fracking company that had a well blow up in Pennsylvania and contaminated our water in Maryland, and including joining Reggie and getting all the pollution out from Ohio, actually here in our nuisance suits. So we need to make sure that we take on corporate polluters. We've been millions of dollars here to help us with more benevolent and better environmental plans. We need to make sure we have offshore wind off of Ocean City. The comptroller was against it, but he was for it, but we all can now agree that we need it. We also need to wean ourselves of the coal industry. The comptroller is for the coal industry, but we're not for the coal industry. We need to make sure we have solar power throughout the state. We need to make sure we have that on commercial, residential, and public lands. We need to make sure that we have the electric vehicles charging stations throughout the state. And we need to make sure that we can build a power plant that I've been wanting to do for years on the Eastern Shore, which will convert the 2 billion pounds of chicken manure that goes into the Chesapeake Bay into a power source, a clean power source, which will help sustain agriculture and waterman industry here in Maryland, which are critical to our well-being going forward. So there's a couple other issues that my heads and held the clock up. We have the Conowingo Dam is a huge issue here in Maryland. 50% of the water, whoops, never mind. We need to work on the Conowingo Dam too.
Thank you. Next for Mr. Perez, on the concept of sustainability.
I heard you say justice and sustainability at one point, and the reason why I am noting that is not to be a wise guy, but I think those two terms are so inextricably intertwined. And that's why I love this question. You know, we're the richest state in the country as measured by median income, and yet we have some of the most profound racial and ethnic disparities around. You know, we have the highest incarceration rate of Black men. We have remarkably troubling health disparities in maternal infant mortality. You look at where wastewater treatment plants are located. You look at where communities of color live, and they're all too frequently the victims of environmental injustice. I used to do lead paint work with my students. Baltimore was a lead paint epicenter of the United States. I didn't know what chelation was until I started doing lead paint work 20 years ago. Chelation is the procedure to try to remove lead from your blood. It is painful and it doesn't always work. So when we talk about sustainability and justice, we're really talking about what kind of a Maryland do we want? We need a Maryland in which we understand that we've got 3,100 miles of coastline. We had 200-year floods in Howard County in 4 years. We are at a moment in time, we are the first generation now to know the real dangers of climate change, and we may be the last generation to be able to do something about it. That's why on day one, I would appoint day one a resiliency and climate coordinator, because this is a whole of government exercise. The Able Foundation did a report last December. We are falling behind. We are not leading. And what we need in this issue of justice and sustainability is a governor who has worked on these issues and a governor who can take that whole of government approach. That's what I would do. That's why I love this question, because it gets to the heart of who we are.
Thank you. And you'll hear an alarm at 30 seconds.
Thank you so much. And when we think about this, the issue of sustainability, it is something that does coincide with the environment, where there is a measure of, it's about the responsibility we have to conserve our natural resources and protect our environments. But it's also much bigger than that. Because I believe deeply that there are going to be three issues that are going to help to determine the success of our state over the next decade. That we've got to make our state more competitive while also making it more equitable. That we have got to close the racial wealth gap. And then we've got to protect the climate and deal with the issue of climate change. And the thing about all these issues and where sustainability fits into all of them is that none of them are new issues, but they are all now issues. That we have seen the effects of climate change every single day in urban and rural and suburban environments in areas that I've invested in and worked in, where we've seen how climate change has cost this state over $10 billion over the past decade, that we are literally closing schools because of extreme heat. Where I live in Baltimore, and I'm proud of the fact that I'm a Baltimorean, but I also know that almost 24 schools just yesterday had to close at noon because it got over 90 degrees. And that we're having 100-year storms every 5 years. So we've got to address this crisis in a way that it is showing itself, which is in every way and across sectors. And I have a track record and also a comprehensive plan to be able to, yes, make sure we're setting aggressive targets, like generating 100% clean energy by 2035. Yes, reaching net zero emissions by 25 and actually improving resiliency. But it also does mean being able to work across sectors and the experience to leverage federal dollars and private capital to be able to address the problem and create economic opportunities for Maryland's families. Equity has got to be a crux of when we're talking about sustainability, because it cannot be sustainability for some. It needs to be sustainability for all.
Thank you. Mr. Baker on sustainability.
Thank you. As someone who's served as the chief executive, I know exactly what the question means. Anytime you put your policy together, you talk about sustainability. Sustainability means that the policies that you implement will outlast your administration. And so for us, it was when we were talking about reducing crime, not just reducing crime for a month or 2 weeks or a year, but would it go down continuously over 8 years like it did in our county? When we're talking about economic development, not just one part of our state, but throughout the state, are we actually developing around those infrastructures that we have to make sure it's sustainable beyond our administration? When we created jobs in Prince George's County to take us from last to leading the state 5 years in a row, the object was to create it so it would outlast our administration. We talk about equity and inclusion. It is not just for the time that we're in office, it's so we put it in place so it outlasts us. Sustainability means the quality of life for the people that we represent will outlast us. So the people who come after us will be able to benefit from it. So we're not just doing policy after policy. One of my colleagues who's not here, John Barron, likes to talk about the fact that we have these policies that haven't worked. A lot of times the policies, especially around education, haven't worked because they're not sustainable, because we didn't have the courage to actually stick with it. If we had stuck with the Thornton Commission, just think about it. 20 years ago, Peter knows this, if we stuck with that and funded it, we wouldn't have the current commission. We wouldn't need it. We would actually have been ahead of the COVID coming here, but it wasn't sustainable because we weren't sustainable as a leadership. That is why our administration, Nancy Navarro's and mine, understands this is the center point of how you actually start. Every discussion we started from day one as county executive started with sustainability. Thank you.
Mr. King on the concept of sustainability.
When I think about the concept of sustainability, I think about work that I've done co-chairing a national commission on climate action in the K-12 sector. I co-chaired a commission with Chrissy Todd Whitman, who was PA administrator in the Bush administration. We've got folks who worked on environment and civil rights, education, and we've heard testimony from folks all over the country about the challenge of climate change. And I think about a woman who testified who was a school board member, is a school board member in Santa Barbara, California. And she described that when she ran for school board, she said to people, we really need to take action on climate. And nobody would listen. And then she got on the school board, and every time an issue would come up, like the opportunity to build schools with solar panels, or the opportunity to buy electric buses, she would bring it up, she'd raise her hand, and then people would dismiss her and say, that's not an urgent priority. And then there was a drought, and then there were wildfires, then there was a flood, and then there were mudslides, and there was loss of life, and the highway was blocked for days, and people realized the urgency of the climate issue. And now Santa Barbara has a plan for getting the whole school district to net zero. We don't want to be in the Santa Barbara situation, but that's where we're headed, because we are not acting with urgency around climate. We've proposed a very ambitious plan to get us to net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2035. To do that, the state has to lead by making all of our state office buildings net zero, making all of our schools and college campuses net zero, making our state fleet and our public school buses all electric by 2030. We need to grow not just offshore wind, but solar and geothermal. We need to commit to a thriving renewable energy green economy, and we have to change building standards and stop digging our hole deeper by building new buildings that are reliant on fossil fuels. We need an ambitious vision for how we get to a healthier climate.
Everyone has done a great job keeping with time, by the way. Nevertheless, we're still running behind because that's just what happens at these things. We are going to go ahead and take a few, at least one, possibly two questions from the crowd. So if you have a question, just raise your hands really big, and you may or may not win the lottery.
And again, it should be a question and be brief, and start right here.
Thank you.
Let me preface this by saying this will go first to Mr. Hanson.
My name is Mark Woodard. You're running our leisure world. My question is, first, to do anything, you have to win the election. So how are you going to win the election, which we haven't done real well recently? And two, if you win the election, how are you going to govern, which means working with the legislature successfully?
And also, it's going to be 90 seconds to answer these questions.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the question, because I think it's the most important question of all, Mark. I mean, if none of these conversations we've got some incredibly talented people running for governor here, but none of it is a moment if we lose the election. We've lost 3 of the last 5 elections. Hey, Marty, we lost 3 of the last 5 elections, and the last election we lost by the biggest margin any Democrat has ever lost in the state, and that wasn't a Democratic year. This is going to be the most Republican year of our lives, and we need to make sure we have candidates that can actually win. And so Candace Hollingsworth, who was the mayor of Hyattsville for 6 years before that, she was on the council, and then she left when George Floyd got murdered to start Our Black Party, which is a national organization, and then she came and joined on ticket. We're the only 2 executives in this race on the ticket. And so people are not going to vote for somebody without experience. Governor is not a starter job. You don't shave in the morning, see someone, a governor in the mirror, and say, I think I'm going to go run for that. You need relevant experience, and the regular independents and the left-leaning Republicans are going to think that's important. Right now, we have 66% of people that are undecided in this election. People are just starting to tune in. We cannot live in la-la land and think we just throw up somebody in there and we're going to be Kelly Schultz. She's going to be incredibly formidable. And we need to make sure we have the right candidates with the right message, with the right experience. And rhetoric does not make a record. And people need to be vetted so that we can make sure we have the right candidates running.
Thank you. Next, we'll hear from Mr. Perez on how to win the election, 90 seconds.
Great. We have built a remarkably racially, ethnically, geographically, and ideologically diverse coalition. I'm proud to have the endorsements of people that you know well, like Ike and Catherine Leggett. I'm proud to have the endorsements of Ben Kramer. I'm proud to have the endorsement of Vaughn Stewart. I'm proud to have the endorsement of Bonnie Cullison, people you know well and trust. I was proud to have received the endorsement of the Washington Post about a week and a half ago. And they said it's a large field and it's a qualified field. The question is, who is the most qualified? And for the Washington Post editorial board, these are their words, the answer was clear, and I'm honored and humbled by that. And I think part of it is because I am a charter member of the GSD wing of the Democratic Party. I want to get stuff done. You know, Washington ain't getting anything done. If we had another 9/11, there wouldn't be a 9/11 commission because they wouldn't be able to agree on it. We can get so much stuff done here in Maryland. And that is how we are winning. We have 250,000 labor union members and their families whose unions have endorsed our campaign. We are reaching out and have reached out to diverse communities that haven't been involved and haven't been reached out to in the past. 14% of Latinos who were eligible to vote voted in 2018, 72% in the Biden election, a five-fold increase. I don't blame the community, I blame the candidates in 2018 for not having sufficient outreach. That's how we're going to win now, and that's how we will win in the general election. Expand the electorate.
Next, we're going to go to Mr. Moore. You'll hear an alarm with 30 seconds remaining.
Thank you so much. And I could not be more proud of the campaign that we are running, because we are running a campaign that is not just poised to win a primary. We're running a campaign that's poised to win the general election. I'm proud of the fact that Aruna Miller and myself have received more endorsements by members of the Maryland General Assembly, to include people like Senator Susan Lee, Senator Cheryl Kagan, that we've received the only campaign to receive the endorsements, and Delegate Lukey, that we received the endorsements of County Executives Angela Alsobrooks in Prince George's County and County Executive Stuart Pittman over in Anne Arundel County, that we received the endorsements from mayors as diverse from the mayor of District Heights to the mayor of Hagerstown to the mayor of Cambridge, that our campaign just a few weeks ago ended up winning the Western Maryland straw poll, and the campaign that came in second, we more than doubled them. And when you think about what's happening, the fact that we have over 6,000 volunteers around this state, the fact that we've raised more resources than any other campaign, and 73% of our donations are $100 or less. We're building the best grassroots campaign. And you consider the fact that Steny Hoyer endorsed our campaign. And when he did, he said some very kind things about the vision and values and our ability to get things done for myself and Delegate Aruna Miller. But he also said, this is the campaign that is actually poised to win. Because as he said, I'm a Democrat and I'm tired of losing. This is our moment to get this right, to build a broad coalition, to bring a new vision into the state, and to build a state where we are not going to leave anybody behind. And that's the power that we believe, not just in the coalition that we're building, and the fact that we are the only campaign in this field that's actually led from the private sector, the nonprofit sector, the military, the legislative branch, and the executive branch.
Mr. Baker, the question was, how are you going to win this election? And you have 90 seconds to answer.
Thank you. I've heard the folks talk about the endorsements, and I got a lot of endorsements in 2018. I got one very important endorsement in this election, and that's my youngest daughter. So getting her endorsement was a major accomplishment. How are we going to win this election? The way that we're going to win it is to have Democrats come up there with experience. If you look at the experience, the executive experience of our ticket, I'm the only one who has been an executive at the local level, the second largest jurisdiction in the state of Maryland, and have a record of accomplishments, not just being there, but actually getting things done. You look at Nancy Navarro, the only female Latina on the council, her record on the school board and accomplishing things in the second and the largest jurisdiction there is. We need to come at this with people who know how to create jobs in Maryland, who've actually done it, who've actually improved the school system in Maryland, who've actually lowered crime in Maryland, who've actually done it here. Not who wish, hope, dream it, but have actually done it. Coming up there, that's what we're gonna have to do in the general election to win this. And the way we do it is to actually talk to people and voters. That is what we have done in our campaign. That's why we're doing public financing. We wanted to spend our time talking to you, not to corporations, not flying around the United States, but actually talking to you about how we solve the problems that we all face. That's how we're going to win. That's what our campaign will do. Thank you.
You know, when I was deciding to run, one of the folks that I talked to about the race was Stacey Abrams, and I had a conversation with Stacey Abrams about her race in Georgia. And one of the observations she made is that people assumed that when Stacey was running for governor, that she wouldn't get votes in rural parts of Georgia. That people would say, oh, Stacey Abrams, that's the crazy black lady from Atlanta. And they did, in fact, say, Stacey Abrams, that's the crazy black lady from Atlanta. But then someone else would say, no, she came to my church. No, she visited my small business. No, I met her at the fish fry. And so one of the things that we committed to in this campaign was to campaign everywhere. And we've made a point of spending time in every single county, talking with folks. We've been out in Garrett County, we've been down to St. Mary's County. They sometimes say, oh, St. Mary's County, we don't see a lot of Democrats here, but we've been there. We've won the endorsement of the Lower Shore Progressive Caucus because we've been the campaign spending time on the Eastern Shore, making sure that we are competitive in every part of the state. We also know the Republicans are going to try to use the Glenn Youngkin playbook in this race. Kelly Schultz's first ad is on a parent bill of rights. She's going to use an attack on public education, an attack on teaching the truth of our history as a wedge to try to win this election. As a lifelong educator, as a current public school parent, I believe I'm best positioned to push back on that argument, not only to make sure that we defeat Kelly Schultz, but to make sure that we make the case for public education for the country as a whole.
Thank you very much. And with your help, I'm going to be the next governor. I'm the only candidate that's run not once, not twice, not 3 times, but 4 times statewide. Last time I ran against a Republican, I got more votes than any person in history for a state office. And I got that because I have a reputation for being, yes, I'm a Democrat. Yes, I love the values, principles of the Democratic Party. But I'm not a robot. I don't let people come in who are powerful and walk into the office and say, you have to demonize the other side. That's not me. And I'm certainly not someone who people come in and say, you need to do this because I'm one of the political bosses. My whole brand is to be an honest, accountable, transparent, thoughtful, fiscally responsible, socially compassionate, straight shooter. And that's why I get hundreds of thousands of independent votes when I run, in addition, hundreds of thousands of Democratic votes, and I get hundreds of thousands of Republican votes. Even though they don't agree with me, they say, hey, this guy is someone who's accessible. I'll just very quickly give you my cell phone number, 301-332-1961. I'm going to keep it as governor, and thank you very much. We're ahead right now. We're going to stay ahead.
Thank you, everyone. Looking at the clock, I'm going to make the executive decision that we move to closing arguments. If you can see the list of questions that I have, it's very long. I'm sure people in this room would love to keep you guys all locked in this room for hours and hours and hours picking your brains. But we're going to move on to, I keep saying closing arguments, your closing statements. I'm married to a lawyer. We'll move on to your closing statements. If you wanted to incorporate one question that I have here, someone asked if you could accomplish one goal in your first year in office, what would it be? And everyone's going to have 2 minutes for this question. And we're starting with Mr. Perez.
Thank you for being here. I love Leisure World because you understand that democracy is not a spectator sport. You know, when I started driving up here tonight, it was raining cats and dogs. And when I got here, I saw a rainbow. And I thought to myself, this is a metaphor for where we are as a nation right now. We have remarkable storm clouds. Our democracy is on fire. It's a 5-alarm blaze. And it's on the ballot federally. It's on the ballot here. There's so much on the ballot. And Shannon and I are running for governor because we understand that we will always be judged by how we help those who are least able to help themselves. That's been my life's work. Jobs, justice, and opportunity. Getting stuff done. Getting it done at a local level. Getting it done at a state level. Getting it done at a federal level. The question about what the one thing you can do. The reason that's a hard question to answer is because so many people have so many things going on in their life, and they need a governor who can multitask. If I had to do one thing, I'd make sure every Maryland resident has access to quality, affordable health insurance and quality, affordable prescription drugs. But I'm not stopping there, folks. And I would ask you, take a really good look. Vet, look at what everyone has done. We have a copy of the post editorial at the door. Take a look at it, because they kicked the tires as well, and they made a judgment. And I hope you'll make the same judgment. Thank you so much for having us. Thank you for your engagement.
Mr. Moore.
Thank you so much for having me. And when I think about the thing we want to be able to get done, I want to remind Marylanders that we can do big things again. You know, this is not the time for either small politics or small policies. This is not the time that we're going to have a continuation where we have a legislature who knows that it's not about, can you put together a bill and do you have the votes for passage, where they, for the past 8 years, have had to worry about, do I have enough votes for a veto override? Because there's been no sense of partnership. That when we say that we can do big things like have a 21st century education system that teaches our students how to be not just employees, but employers, that we can make sure that we're investing in early childhood education, that we can improve access to quality healthcare and lower prescription drug costs, that we can make our communities safer, that it's not hyperbole, but it's work that we've actually done before. And that as Maryland, we can get this done. You know, I come from a long line of preachers and teachers. That's been my family's background. And the first person on my mom's side of the family that was born in the United States was my grandfather. And his father was a minister and a vocal minister. And it was actually the Ku Klux Klan that ran them out of this country. And most of my members of my family never returned. They vowed never to return back, but my grandfather did. And he came, he graduated from an HBCU. He became the first Black minister in the history of the Dutch Reformed Church. When my father died, it was he and my grandmother that brought us in. He had this deep Jamaican accent, but still he's one of the most patriotic men I've ever met in my life. And he always taught me this idea of having faith, not fear, that we can go big. And that's what Maryland needs to do. And that's what Maryland will do over the next decade.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank
Thank you. I want to thank Leisure World for having us here. You're always engaged in what's going on in Maryland. That's why when we announced our support of reducing prescription drugs, that we did it right here, County Executive Leggett and I, right here in Leisure World. So what would I want, people to think, my first 30 days in office? I want people to walk away thinking that and understanding that I have a communal sense of urgency, that we have a sense of urgency to get big things done. It's not just about what you say, what you believe, it's can you actually get it done? Because if you can't, you're not helping anyone. We as Democrats have to stop apologizing, like I said, for being Democrats. It is not just the Republicans. They're not the ones that are holding us back from moving from raising the minimum wage to going to a living wage. They're not the ones just holding us back from moving from health care to Medicare for all. They're not just the only ones who aren't talking about the fact that people in Baltimore City, we see the slaughter of young Black boys who are our children, and they're not the only, Republicans aren't the only ones not talking about it. We have to talk hard truth to power if we want to win and if we want to change the situation. That is what Nancy Navarro and I have dedicated our public life to. That is what she's done in Montgomery County. That is what I've done at the state level. That is what I've done as county executive. That is what I will do as your governor. Thank you.
you. Mr. King?
I believe our recovery from COVID has to be more ambitious than just trying to get back to February 2020. This really should be a New Deal moment for us in the state, where we tackle our deeper systemic challenges. That means we have to be willing to ask those who make over $1 million and large corporations to pay their fair share. As we all watch Jeff Bezos launch himself into space in his personal rocket ship, we understand that we have an income inequality problem as a state and as a country. We need to make sure that we have the resources to deliver world-class schools in every corner of the state, to deliver on healthcare for every Marylander, to actually limit the cost of prescription drugs. Not just through the Prescription Accountability Board narrowly for state plans, but for all private insurers as well. We've got to make sure that we limit those costs. We've got to make sure that we invest in public transportation and a supply of housing we can afford. Now, some people would say these things are a long shot. Well, I've shared with you, my whole life has been a long shot. The fact that I'm standing here after losing both my parents was a long shot. My family's journey has been a long shot. I live in Silver Spring. My great-grandfather was enslaved in Gaithersburg, Maryland. The cabin where he lived with his family as enslaved people still standing on the property in Gaithersburg. When I stand inside of that cabin, I think about how profound it is that in my family, we went in 3 generations from enslaved in that cabin to serving in the cabinet of the first Black president. That is what is possible if you have hope and ambition. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And I've made 10,000 visits to small businesses all over the state as comptroller to thank them for their economic contribution to our state. And as I campaign now around the state, I have lots of people tug at my sleeve and say, you've been a great comptroller. You'll make a great governor. Some people say to me, is it possible you could be governor and comptroller at the same time? No, that doesn't happen. But I think the proof is in the pudding as far as my handling of your money. On March 10th, I announced a $7.5 billion surplus for the state, 2/3 of it from the federal relief plan. A big chunk of it came from the fact that I unilaterally extended the tax date for small businesses and families who needed a 90-day loan from the state of Maryland, interest-free and penalty-free. I extended the tax deadline from April 15th to July 15th, 3 years in a row. So at the same meeting, announcing the $7.5 billion surplus, I said we need a gas tax holiday. 1 week later, the legislature passed this gas tax holiday. AAA bond rating is strong. The pension that I'm chair of the board of trustees of is sound. And we are on the way to a unified state, competent government, and economic prosperity. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Leisure World, and for coming and staying. We are in a time of crisis. We've talked about many of those issues. We're coming out of COVID. We need to rebuild our economy. We obviously have a climate change crisis. We have a criminal justice crisis, both bringing crime down and bringing justice up. And we have a choice crisis where we're going to try and take away women's reproductive rights. We need somebody who can fight for people. I fought against the big banks. When I was president of all the attorneys general in the country, we took on the big banks, and we had the National Mortgage Foreclosure Settlement. We got $2 billion here in Maryland to keep people from being foreclosed upon and kicked out of their houses. That's the kind of leadership we need. I took on every prescription drug company you could name. I took them on for their pricing, their off-label marketing, and the behavior that they conducted when I was Attorney General. People, there's no other person here that great people, none of them have a scintilla background in criminal justice or the environment. And those are two very, very big issues, both of which are in crisis. So people are going to vote. The question was, how are we going to win? People are going to vote for somebody who they can trust. They want someone with experience, they want someone who's been vetted. In Western Maryland, we had actual real live voters, hear all of us, and vote. I beat everyone in this room. I beat the comptroller 71 to 10. And that's because we need somebody that people can trust and believe in and are going to be able to win in the fall. It's critical. So you know me. You've supported me for my 16 years when I was in elected office, Montgomery County, and Attorney General. I ask for your support on July 19th. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Well, how are we going to win? We're going to win because any one of these people these candidates is a winner. And on July 20th, the day after the primary, we support whichever one of you wins the primary. That's how we win. Now, if I can have your attention for just 1 minute before you break for the doors. First of all, there are some people here. We have some people here who are not Democratic Club members. We have applications for you right over there. Judy is waving them. If you are a Democratic Club member, you need to renew. Your membership expires this month. We have those applications over there also. But before we go, I not only want to. You don't have to live in Leisure World to be a member, and for membership, it has its advantages. We are going to thank you. We are going to have a tape of this, and we will give you the link through our newsletter, the Donkey Dispatch. So become a member, and we will stay active. We will inform you. We will do voter education, voter registration. And for the last 6 months, we've been writing letters and postcards to Democrats and to lead Democrats in contested states to win those elections. So if at the door, if you could be quiet for just a minute, please. At the door, please be quiet for just a minute. I want to say something about our moderator, who I think did a fantastic job. And I want to say to her, she's pregnant and your child is very lucky to have you as a mother. Thank you, everybody.